Ever wonder how Kansas went from playing small-town bars to defining American progressive rock? Well, today I'm diving into their debut album and uncovering the moments that set the stage for their legendary sound. Now, listening to one of my favourite YouTube channels hosted by Pat at Close to the Edge, he was looking at the band's first 5 albums in their discography quite recently. Now, he really rated those albums, so I thought I'd take a look, not knowing that much about the band. But what I do have is a real soft spot for albums that didn't really get the love they deserved when they first came out, but over time have earned a place in rock history. Now, Kansas are a prime example of that. I mean, when you think of Kansas today, you think of songs like Dust in the Wind or Carry On Wayward Son, the real obvious classics. But their debut album, well, that's where it all started, and it's way deeper than those radio hits. So let's set the stage here. Kansas dropped their debut in 1974, and it didn't exactly blow up the charts, selling around 100,000 copies at first. Although that's not terrible, but it's nothing to write home about. But here's the crazy thing. It didn't go gold until 1995, a full 21 years later. By then, Kansas had built this loyal following, especially in the progressive rock scene, and the album just really kept selling. Now think about that for a moment. An album released 2 decades prior, still finding its way into people's collections. That alone tells you something about the quality of the music. Kansas were really ahead of their time, no question about that. Now this album kicks off with Can I Tell You? And man, it's a real fine opener. Right off the bat, you're hit with that Robbie Steinhardt's violin. It just screams at you. And this isn't your typical rock band with some violin slapped on top. Steinhardt was an integral part of their sound, and you hear it right away. And then you've got Kerry Livgren and Rich Williams on guitars, throwing out those riffs and licks that, well, quite honestly, they had no business playing at that age. They were so young, but already so good. If you ever get the chance, check out the demo version of this track from their 1994 box set. You can hear how much they progressed in just a couple of years. The sound on this album is tighter, more aggressive, and Steinhardt, man, he sounds like he finally found his confidence. The second track, Bringing It Back, is a cover of J.J. Cale's song. Now here's the thing. This track has a heavy blues rock vibe, which might surprise some people who know Kansas more for their progressive side. This is a gritty biker bar rock type thing. We have to remember that before they became this big progressive rock band, Kansas were hustling in gigs in small bars all over the Midwest. Most of their audience had never heard of prog legends like Peter Gabriel or John Anderson. Frankly, wouldn't have cared less if they had. Now, Bringing It Back reflects those early days when they were just trying to get by playing for people who wanted to hear hard, bluesy rock. Steinhardt's vocals and violin really stand out here. And even though this track isn't what most people probably think of when they think of Kansas, it's still a killer song that they play live to this day. Then we've got Lonely Wind. This is a totally different vibe. Steve Walsh wrote this one, and it's almost like a ballad. Not quite. It's slower, more acoustic, and you don't have the heavy guitar layers that you get in a lot of Kansas's later stuff. But what it does show is a more reflective side of the band. Now, if you're a fan of Walsh's voice, and let's be honest, who isn't? This track is a real showcase for him. It's not flashy, but it's a beautiful song that gives you a breather before we get into the real meat of the album. And that brings me to Belexes and Journey from Mariabronn. Now, these 2 tracks are where Kansas really starts showing off their progressive rock chops. Belexes is full of tempo changes, solos from just about every member of the band, and Walsh's vocals just take off. Livgren's guitar work on this track is incredible. He shows a kind of patience and control in his playing that's way beyond his years. These songs are like a blueprint for what Kansas would become. This fusion of hard rock, classical influences and progressive complexity. Now, if you do love Kansas's later work, these two tracks are worth the price of admission alone, make no mistake. Flipping the album over to side 2, we get The Pilgrimage, and this is one of the most underrated Kansas songs out there. It's got these star piano chords and dissonant melodies that create this really cool, earthy vibe. Walsh and Steinhardt harmonise on vocals, and the way the violin and guitar trade off, it's just fantastic. It's one of those tracks that reminds you Kansas weren't just a rock band. They were musicians in the truest sense of the word. This song feels like it comes from a different place, almost like Livgren was tapping into something deeper, something that he'd revisit years later with Protocore. Next up is Abaku. This track is heavy on the violin again, and it's another song that feels, well, really almost philosophical in its message. It wasn't played much in the later years, which is a shame because it's a great example of Kansas's ability to blend rock with more orchestral elements. The violin gives it this lush, expansive feel, and it's another track that really lets Livgren's songwriting shine. I'd love to see the current Kansas lineup bring this one back into their set list, especially with David Ragsdale on violin, who's been killing it in recent years. Finally, we end with The Death of Mother Nature Suite. Now, this is simply an epic, and it's also one of the earliest examples of a rock band making a full-on environmental statement. It's a no-holds-barred condemnation of how humanity is destroying the planet through pollution and just sheer neglect. The song is big, bold and ambitious, both musically and thematically. I can't imagine many bands in the 70s tackling this kind of subject matter, but Kansas went for it, and it worked. The arrangement is intricate, the musicianship is top-notch, and it leaves you with this feeling that Kansas were just swinging fences right from the start. The thing about this album is that it didn't get its due back in the day. A lot of people slept on it, but over time it's earned a status as a hidden gem in progressive rock. Now, the cover art with that iconic portrait of John Brown, it's instantly recognisable to prog fans. But how many people have really sat down and listened to the entire album, though? What it is a fascinating snapshot of a young band still finding their way, but with so much potential already on display. Listening to this album today, I feel a sense of nostalgia, not just for the music itself, but for that time in the early 70s when bands like Kansas were breaking new ground. They were experimenting. They were pushing the limits of what rock music could be. And while 30 years may have passed since these guys were young and hungry, the music still holds up. Kansas didn't just make records, they made statements. And this debut album is a perfect example of that. So, if you are someone who only knows Kansas from the big radio hits, do yourself a favour. Take 45 minutes and listen to this debut album. It's a great way to hear where one of America's greatest progressive rock bands started. And I guarantee you won't regret it. Hey, thanks for watching this one. As always, leave me a comment, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.